those present and those online, if any, to this, the Federalism Commission, Tuesday, October 10th, 2023 at 4 p.m. Call the meeting to order. First item is approval of the minutes of the August 7th, 2023 meeting. Do I have a motion? Chair Winterton.
Yeah, we'll make the motion to approve the minutes of August 7th.
Discussion of the motion. The motion is we approve the minutes of August 7th, 2023. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good. We'll go on to our second. Welcome Mr. Gene Shawcraft, our Commissioner, Colorado River Authority of Utah. Welcome, and we'll turn the time to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm not sure my microphone.
Pull that right close to you first off.
Is that any better?
Let's see if we can.
How about now? There we go.
That's good.
Okay,
There.
perfect. Generally, the red button means off, but in this case, the red button means green. And I assume if it flashes at me, I quit. Is that correct? Okay.
He gets tired.
Okay, all right. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Ladies and gentlemen, I have pulled a few slides together, but more importantly, if you have questions, I'd rather address those than just continue to show, just go through the PowerPoint. I don't know, are you able to see the PowerPoint at this point, Nathan?
Not yet.
The PowerPoint's going to look a whole lot better than I do, so thank you. Okay, good. I wanted to just give you a quick snapshot of the number of facilities in Utah. For the most part, these are storage facilities that were built with federal dollars. So the majority of the projects that deliver water to, particularly to the Wasatch Front, are all associated with federal projects. Some of these dams are, 2 or 3 or 4 of them are involved in the same federal project. Others are independent, but at the same time, this gives you a feel for the number of facilities that we draw upon to maintain a water supply in years like 2020 and 2021, and so they play a key role in the water supply for the state of Utah. All again are funded with federal dollars, most of which are required to pay back. Some of them have already paid back the federal government for their involvement, but all were funded with federal dollars. Just want to give you a quick example of the Central Utah Water District. That's the district I represent, as an example of how this federal process works. We have in the Central District boundaries about 1.8 million people. 62% of the state's population live within Central Utah Water District boundaries. This light tan shaded area represents the footprint of the district in the state of Utah. Blowing this up just a little bit, this is a schematic of the Central Utah project. If you'll note, this green line that zigs and zags around this area is the basin divide. So everything on the right-hand side of this green line is in the Colorado River Basin, and Senator Winterton sees some of that water in the winter as it flows down the rivers. And the project, the concept of the project is to collect runoff between this green line and this purple line. The purple line is actually the system that has tunnels, pipelines, etc., that all by gravity bring water into Strawberry Reservoir. At Upper Stillwater, we're bringing, when the water's there in the spring, about 285 second feet. And by collecting along these streams, we end up with about 600 cubic feet per second coming into Strawberry Reservoir. Strawberry Reservoir is a little over 1 million acre feet, and that's what provides some assurance that we'll have a water supply along the Wasatch Front if we go through another serious dry cycle. You'll notice that Strawberry Reservoir is still physically located in the Colorado River Basin. So it's through a series of tunnels and pipelines that water comes down Diamond Fork Canyon to the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon. And there's a line that comes all the way to the mouth of Provo Canyon to deliver water into Salt Lake County. and we're still in the process of constructing this line that will go to South Utah County. We're focused right now on what we call the Utah Lake System, and it was in 1992 when the Central Utah Project Completion Act was passed, which did a number of things, but principally put the district in charge of construction rather than the Bureau of Reclamation. That's unique. That there's not another project in the country that does that. Overhead was cut dramatically by having the district do that, and that's why Congress allowed us to step up and make that happen. We've got about, again, just to orient this, over in the upper right-hand corner is the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon, and then you can see these segments that we have constructed from the mouth of Spanish Fork Canyon all the way to and past Payson. We have about a $100 million project that will bid on the 7th of November this year to finish the pipeline, that would then deliver water to as far south as Santaquin and potentially into Juab County. And so the rest of these are either finished or substantially complete, and that's where we will use a portion of Utah's Colorado River water in the state of Utah. Utah County, as you all know, is projected to more than double in population from its current about 600, 700,000 to 1.6, 1.7 by 2065. And we're convinced that all of those folks will want and need a drink of water, and we're in the process of preparing to do that for them. One thing of interest is the variability of funding we receive from the federal government. So when the CUPCA legislation was passed in 1992, you can see in FY93 we received about $2 million. That increased up to as high as $25, $26 million, and then it dipped a little bit, and then in 2009 we were awarded some ARA money that allowed us to build a pipeline essentially through the town of Mapleton and South Provo. And then politics and other things got in the way, and we were dropped to nearly nothing for a period of time. We have a capacity to do at least $30 million a year on an ongoing basis, and of course that wasn't happening at this point. What we had to do with the passage of CUPCA is we had to come up with 35% local cost share. So that was what allowed us to keep building pipeline during this period of time. We were using our money, Central's money, that we were able to, what we called advance. So we paid more than our fair share for that period of time. And then as we get repayment obligations, we prepay those with that advance that we've made, which keeps us fairly balanced on the 35-65% cost share. Now, one other point I would just like to mention with regard to financing, it was in 1965 when the district was created that there was a vote of the population of the district, and 93% of the folks voted to assess themselves a property tax in order to allow for construction of the Central Utah Project. But for that vote, the federal government wasn't comfortable providing money for the project, and that tax money is what allowed the project to move forward and continues to use, and we continue to use that money for our local cost share in order to continue to build the project. Again, just quickly reminding you of all the federal facilities. Each of these projects would have a similar story to Central, with the exception that they were all constructed by the Bureau and not by the local entity. Some of these projects have been turned over to a local entity like Weber Basin for operation, maintenance, replacement. Others are retained in the purview of the federal government for operation and maintenance. Now, let me just shift gears quickly to the Colorado River. This was a projection a year ago, or just under a year ago, of how we thought the water would turn out next year, this past year, in other words. So we were projected to have, in the best case, about 120% of normal. but the most probable case, about 65% of normal, which is that green bar over on the far right-hand side. The red bar is what they called the minimum projection. The green bar was the most probable, and the maximum probable was 121%. As you all know, we had an incredible year. We went from a system storage of about 40%, this was the bad year, 40% down to 34%, lost almost 4 million acre feet in the system and during that real dry year. So a huge hit on the storage in the system. This is critical. Elevations are critical. Just wanted to point out, this is a cross-section of Glen Canyon Dam. On the left-hand side, you can see the blue line that daylights into the reservoir. If the elevation gets below that, there's no capacity to generate power, and there's question whether or not we can make deliveries downstream because the head is what allows water to push through the pipe. This elevation was maintained because we did the reclamation along with the upper division states and lower division states for that matter, arbitrarily kept or retained or brought into Lake Powell 1.6 million acre feet, which was 30 feet of depth. So had that not happened, we would have been below power pole elevation. That's how critical things were a year ago, a little over a year ago. So things were done in order to maintain that. That water, some of it came from Flaming Gorge, is now being captured in Flaming Gorge to make up for it. The other water that was held during the spring has been released during the fall. So we're back now in Lake Powell to what should be there, and we don't owe water downstream, or we are still collecting a little bit upstream to make sure we get Flaming Gorge back to full and overcome that deficit of the 463,000 that you can see was released to from Flaming Gorge. You all know we had an incredible winter. That stop sign is about, the top of that stop sign is about 9 feet. And so we had a hard time finding the stop sign until someone hit it with a snow machine. But we found it and put a little bush over it so somebody else might not hit it next time. But 9 feet, this little standpipe is the vent pipe for a Forest Service outhouse at Bald Mountain Pass. This is Salt River in Phoenix. This only runs maybe one every 10, 15, 20 years, and of course it was flowing like crazy last spring. This happens to be a cathedral in the desert at Lake Powell. You can see the little waterfall right back in this area, and again a little shot of that same area, and this is what it looks like with about 65 feet of water added to it. So tremendous amount of water, tremendous benefit, but that still put us, we went from 34% storage in the overall system to 44%. So we're still not anywhere close to out of the woods, but we certainly loved last year. Okay, now let me just share with you quickly where we are in our negotiations with the federal government and the other basin states with regard to moving forward. The current actions, I'll mention, supplemental environmental impact statement, have to do with the fact that reclamation, because the water in Lake Powell got so low last year, they were convinced they didn't have enough tools to manage the river at that low elevation. And so they are pursuing an environmental impact statement to modify how they operate the river in the interim time. In other words, between now and the time that we renegotiate the 07 guidelines, which have to happen by 2026. They came out with a plan that distributed reductions in the lower basin by priority, which would have meant that Arizona would have taken the hit because they have a lower priority, or distribute reductions by use. And of course, in that case, California uses more of the water, and they would have taken a hit. Interestingly enough, as you might guess, California nor Arizona liked either one of those two action plans, so they came up with their own, which will actually, if it comes to fruition with all the contracts they have anticipated, will actually cut use by more than what either one of the two action items would have done. So we're anxious to see that. We'll continue to learn more about that. This process, they anticipate having a draft statement out by the end of October. Then we'll have 45 days to comment and prepare for how they might change operation of Flaming Gorge, at Glen Canyon. And the priority would be to reduce uses from 7 million acre feet, which is what they have a limit now under their under the record of decision, to as low as 6, which would make a significant difference on how much water gets released downstream.
Director, just clarification, is that for, or Commissioner, I'll say, is that for the lower basin? The LB proposed alternative 3?
Yes,
That Arizona, California are working on?
correct.
And I heard you say that that would decrease even more the
Yes,
usage?
they are, their plan, Reclamation said, we will divide the reductions that need to occur in the lower basin by either priority or by use. California, Arizona said, we can come up with a better plan where we will actually increase our reductions, in other words, use less than what either of the action alternative items 1 or 2 would have described.
That would be a state-generated plan versus
Correct.
federal.
Correct.
This is a Federalism Commission, and that's what we're dealing with. And so is there a sense that that would impact the upper basin then as well, or?
In this case,
that's not
no, because what they're talking about is how they operate Glen Canyon Dam and how they would reduce deliveries to the lower basin based on one of these two priorities.
Thank you.
And they claim they can do better than that. Again, if they get all the contracts signed, they would do better than that, which we're excited to see. They don't have all the contracts yet in place, but anticipate having them in place in the very near future. Now remember, this is just for temporary action between now and the time that the post-26 negotiations are completed. So frankly, this was just a year ago, looking at the reservoirs. They said, we can't function if we can't figure out a way to reduce our deliveries out of Glen Canyon. And in order to do that, they had to go through an environmental impact statement process to do that. And had we had this really wet year a year ago, they probably wouldn't have pursued this. But they needed additional tools in the event we had another extremely dry year. And if you remember a year ago, climatologists were saying this is the 3rd year of La Nina. That's why those bar charts were so low in that chart I showed a little bit earlier.
Would we assume from your earlier presentation on increase of storage, if we had a like year that in 23-24 water season, that we would anticipate that being at 54 capacity now? It looks like it increased about 10% capacity
10%.
with that. Is that a fair statement?
If we had another year identical to this, we would probably increase by more than 10%, because a year ago, all of the reservoirs in the upper basin were relatively low.
Right, okay, right.
And so, for example, Strawberry was 70%. Today, we're sitting at 88. So all of the reservoir system in the upper basin, I looked the other day, everything above Lake Powell, combined storage is about 82%.
Okay.
And a year ago, it was probably not even 50.
So just for the benefit of the commission, point of reference, in this time last year, to raise the Great Salt Lake 1 foot, it would take 1 million acre feet. And that's the capacity of the Strawberry Reservoir. Just point of reference for the commission members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That is a very pertinent point. The other thing that is beginning is the process of negotiation, what happens after 2026. Reclamation has issued a notice that we have responded to. Comments were due on the 15th of August. Our comments are along the line, simplistically, of what you see there listed. We need something that responds earlier. We need something that responds to a wide range of hydrologies. We need something that is based on what's actually in the system, not forecasts. In the spring of 2021, within about a 4-week period, the forecast dropped by 1.5 million acre-feet. And that makes it very difficult to operate a system when you're basing it solely on forecasts. You can see some other concepts that we believe are critical as we move into our negotiations with the 07 guidelines. This little chart just gives you an idea of graphically those bar charts that I showed you earlier. If we end up in a situation where this spring we came up about 65 feet, that's this dark line here on the left, we've dropped about 11, which is normal. After runoff, the deliveries are higher than the inflow. And then these 3 lines are the anticipated minimum, 90% chance that we'll get more than this. This is the 50-50 chance, and this is 10% chance we would get that high. That's what we're hoping for, is another full reservoir. You can see 3525 is that elevation at which we start to get really concerned about power generation at Glen Canyon Dam. And I believe this is about the last slide. This green bar is what we ended up with last year, which was 142% of normal. The very first slide I showed their best hope was 121, so we did better than that. And then you can see the red is a 60% forecast. The darker green is most probable at about 104%, and then the blue bar is about 183%, which is something that I'd love to see. So with that, I'll entertain whatever questions you have. I hope that has been helpful and was what you were looking to hear. If not, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a few questions. Let's first go to, I think that may be Representative Romero, is that correct? Or Senator Kwan? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering about the work that the Navajo Nation and other tribes in this space. I noticed that you didn't mention it here, but I know that our state has done much in the last year or two. Can you give a quick overview on how we're working with the tribal nations?
Yes, I would be happy to do that. You are very correct in that within the last 2 years, the state of Utah and the federal government have completed their settlement with the Navajo Nation in Utah. The Navajo Nation in Arizona has not yet settled their situation, but in Utah we have, and that has been a wonderful thing. There is a proposal on the table at this moment to take a portion of the water that is in New Mexico, bring it into the southwest corner of Utah to the Navajo Nation, which would provide them treated drinking water to the tune of about 2,000 acre-feet, which is a lot of water for drinking purposes. That bill is, I'm not quite sure how to describe what's happening in Washington at this moment without being disparaging, but there is a bill that is being considered in Washington that would allow for that to happen. And that's where we are with the Navajo. The rest of the Navajo portion in Utah has been resolved. The commissioners from the 4 upper division states, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, have been meeting almost monthly with the upper basin tribal leadership in their homelands. So we've been in Toyac, we've been in Ignacio, we've been in Albuquerque, we've been out to Fort Duchesne, and trying to understand how, and in each tribe is different, you understand that, but how we can pull together common interests, particularly in the upper basin, so that as we go into the post-26 negotiations, we're as much on the same page as we can get as we move forward. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but those are a couple of brief things that are happening right now with the tribal nations along with the Upper Colorado River Commission.
Great, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Commissioner, for point of reference for the commission, 1 acre foot of water, it's about 1.5 acre feet per household. Is that correct? On the putting the 2,000 acre feet into scale, or is that different water share there?
That would be significantly more there because along the Wasatch Front in most places, we use about 55–60% of our water outside on lawns and gardens. And a lot of the folks in the Navajo Nation don't have lawns, they have gardens. So they would likely use less per household. But along the Wasatch Front, we're doing a little better now, but for a long time, we were about 1 acre foot per household.
So that would, the assumption is the 2,000 acre feet would 2,000 to 3,000 households would provide because the
At least.
water usage is a lot better
At least, yes.
with our gardens. Okay, Representative Albrecht. Senator,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, just to kind of give an update on that, with the water coming, that's actually New Mexico's water rights that they're actually going to give to the Red Mesa area in Utah. So it's actually we're not taking away from our water rights, right?
My understanding is the 2,000 that would come into Utah would count as Utah's
Oh, it would
portion,
count,
but
okay,
it would
but
come
it's-
out of New Mexico, yes.
New Mexico's allotment, okay.
Correct.
But I was just wondering, a lot of people on the Colorado River, like on the Wasatch Front, they think that, well, whatever happens down there is no big deal to us. But now the water that we're diverting from the Uintas to the Central Utah Water Project that's coming here to Salt Lake and to Provo and soon to Santaquin and Juab County, is that a late water right, or is that so if it's we couldn't say supply the water that's demanded for downstream for Arizona, Mexico, California, or Nevada, that water right would be the first one cut off, wouldn't it? The way it is right now, because like in my area, our water decrees go back to 1865s and stuff like that, so we'd be the last ones to be cut off, other than we're not municipal, we're farms. So the Wasatch Front would be the first ones cut off, basically, from the central water.
You're correct. About 2/3 of the water that's used in Salt Lake County comes from the Colorado River, either through the Provo River Project, which is Deer Creek, and the Weber Diversion and the Duchesne Tunnel, and then another third or a little bit more as we move into the future, more than a third of that will come from the Central Utah Project.
Okay.
The project has a 1954 water right, which in water rights is a youngster, very, very junior. The theory behind the Central Utah Project was to have a reservoir large enough that we could capture water that would allow us to cover the drought cycles as we know they will come, and that assurance that we could bring foreign water, Colorado River water, into the Wasatch Front is really what allows us to store water in Jordanelle Reservoir. So that complex transfer is what allows us to have some security over very severe dry cycles. We are, to your point about not being able to store that water, that would occur under an extremely dry situation. Right now, we are well ahead of what we have to deliver downstream. And as we go through the 2026 negotiations, there has to be acknowledgement that if the pie is smaller, not any one state will take that hit. It's going to have to come from all of the states. So there would still be water to put in Strawberry and bring from the Uinta Basin. There might be years where we can't store as much, but I'm more concerned about what Mother Nature does, frankly, than what would occur in the event that we had to bring additional water into the Wasatch Front.
Okay. And if I could, one more question.
Yes.
Basically, as much as sometimes we dislike the government, they didn't help us with this. They funded the biggest part of the Central Utah Water Project, I've been told, and it was to protect the fish in Utah Lake, the endangered fish, more so than the population. So it wasn't really looking out for us, but they were looking out for the endangered fish in Utah Lake and to make sure they had water.
We try to build multi-purpose projects, and I can tell you that without the June Sucker Recovery Program, we would not be able to deliver the water we're delivering. You're all aware that the June Sucker was downlisted within the last year. The Provo Delta Restoration Project is nearly complete. It was functional this year. I've been told that they found a lot of baby June Suckers this year in the Provo Delta that they've never found before. So that is extremely successful, and we're hoping that we can delist that species within the next 5 to 7 years, which in ESA timeframe is light years.
Thank you.
Fast.
I would just, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to acknowledge that this is one of the most important people in Utah. That the job he's got is to protect our water rights, and as a commission, we need to acknowledge that we really need to keep him healthy and happy, and make sure you stay where you're at, because it's a big deal that we fight this fight, because, you know, water's for fighting and whiskey's for drinking, I guess, or whatever. But anyway, thanks for all you do. I don't think anybody realizes what you do. And
We
so-
are protecting every drop that Utah has the right to protect. We're not trying to steal anybody else's
Right, no.
water, but we are
Keep what we
protecting
have.
every drop that we have the right to protect. And that changes from year to year based
Sure.
on what Mother Nature delivers, because it's a
Wow.
percentage of what's there.
We've, you know, as a state, we've funded his department, and it's probably one of the best things we've done.
And the
and
Colorado River Authority of
for our
Utah.
future,
That's
for the
been
future of Utah. And thanks for all you do.
incredibly helpful.
Thank you.
Incredibly helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. I'm pleased to just comment that this good commissioner is one of my constituents, and it's an honor to have him in at least at one time. I assume you're still there.
Still there.
Still there. It's good district, good place to live,
It
and
is a wonderful
appreciate that. But that really goes to one of the reasons why we're here, and that comment, Senator Hinkins wears a hat as the Senate Chair of our Water Development Commission, so that's a great compliment, Commissioner, to receive. But the reason we've invited him to the Federalism Commission is, as you understand, that the narrative and the federal and state interaction here, and we want to make sure that we're doing all we can to ensure that that's in proper constitutional balance, and get a sense on that, and that'll maybe be a question we'll have you respond to before you release you from the stand there. But we have some other questions. Representative Ivory.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a great setup for what I wanted to ask. And thank you. Echo what the senator has said. I mean, really critical what
Thank
you're
you.
doing and keeping us on top of that. I mean, we're the second driest state in the nation and growing like crazy, but if we don't have water, everything stops. So absolutely critical. You mentioned all of the water that Utah has the right to protect. I'm wondering if you could just give us an overview of jurisdiction over water. You know, I mean, we go back, there's the compact in 1922, and it was the states, and reading in the compact, dispute resolution was by the states and of the states and for the states, and they kind of did that and created that in there. Would you just speak in general terms? I mean, jurisdiction being the governing authority, if you will. Could you just give us an overview of jurisdiction over water, and then kind of speak to what the chairman was talking about? What are we seeing in jurisdictional challenges, difficulties with our federal partner, if you would?
Okay, sure, happy to. The way these projects are set up is they use state water rights and a state water rights system. However, the federal government owns the water. We have at Central a perpetual right to use federal water for Bonneville unit purposes. And that's typical of most of the projects. The federal government in these projects operates under state water law. So every state obviously is a little bit different as far as how they manage their water rights, but each of those states dictates how that water gets used, even though it's federal water, the federal facilities. So there are questions at times as to what the secretarial authority might really be. we're anxious not to push that button because we don't know what the answer is. They don't know what the answer is, to be frank. And so as the
Can
states.
I just, on the federal government owns the water, how did that come about?
Maybe, Commissioner, may I just offer this perspective? It's the right, the federal government has the right to use the water as a result of the land that they're managing. Is that, would that?
Right.
But it's not owner, the people actually own the water
Right.
in Utah, all the water. Is that, would that be helpful?
But it's the federal government that applied for a water right. So that 1954 water right that gives Central Utah the right to use that water is a federal water right. And that water right is held by the federal government. Now, we operate Central with that water right within the laws of the state of Utah, the water right laws within the state. And this has happened, you're all familiar with the Klamath Basin. Years ago, there was a dispute there over endangered species and farmers, and the federal government didn't allow the farmers to take the water. And the Supreme Court has held that up. So we're very anxious to make sure that we understand federal law, we understand what we're doing. That's part of the reason that we were so anxious to get a program put together that helped with the June sucker, so that wasn't an impediment to our diversions and our deliveries out of the Central Utah project. Push come to shove, in the lower basin, in 1922, Arizona was not willing to sign the compact because they were concerned about their tributary flows that obviously flowed to the Colorado River, but in their minds, they wanted full control over their tributary flows rather than have that be part of the Colorado River system. So they chose not to sign the compact. In 1948, the upper division states created the Upper Colorado River Commission, and they concluded at that time that there wasn't as much water in the system as was anticipated when they divided the upper 7.5, lower 7.5, and surplus go to Mexico. That's how it was divided in 1922, essentially. By 1948, it was obvious there wasn't that much water in the system, so the 4 upper basin states divided their water by percentage. After they delivered water to the lower basin states, then we would divide our water by percentage. By doing that, the Fed said, you guys have got things figured out, we'll let you manage these reservoirs. Whereas in the lower basin states, Arizona and California continued the lawsuit that wasn't settled until the mid-60s. And it was concluded that in order for the things to function in the lower basin, the Secretary of Interior would be the rivermaster. In other words, the Secretary would determine, based on requests from the lower division states, how much water they would deliver to their contracts each year. So that's a significant difference, how the lower basin and the upper basin are different, because we have much more say and control over how things work up here than the lower basin does. However, the lower basin has not had significant shortage. They did the last couple of years suffer some shortage based on the elevation of Lake Mead, which was quite low. But up until that point, they've relied essentially on storage. That's why Powell and Mead are as low as they are.
You mentioned that certain Bureau of Rec obligations and things were turned over to the state. How does that happen? And then I guess there's that, and then I understand there's an issue with maintenance and backlog of maintenance on things in the project. Where do we stand on that, and how does that implicate the kinds of things we need to be concerned about in our state-federal partnership and relationship?
Some of the federal facilities are quite old. Hiram Dam, for example, is one of the older federal facilities that is in need of repair. Speaking for the Central Utah project, we are a relatively new project, relatively speaking, because we are still constructing and not delivering yet all of the water that we have the ability to deliver. And we have at Central a very complex asset management program which defines by category how often we visit facilities, how quickly we need to repair and replace certain things, and that's what's helping us project into the future what it is that will be necessary in order for us to continue to maintain these facilities in operational function, because our contracts with cities and other entities are in perpetuity. So we can't shut things down for 6 months and fix them. We've got to keep them fixed as we go. There are some projects that are older that don't have the financial mechanism Central does. In a lot of cases, they're farmer organizations that don't have a lot of capital. And historically, Reclamation built the facilities, and then they would loan money to help rehabilitate those facilities. That is not happening anymore. We're on our own from a federal standpoint. We're not receiving funds to do that. We are receiving funds to finish the Central Utah project, but we will not receive funds to rebuild those federal facilities. So that's on us, and that's something that we are working desperately to make sure we have mechanisms with rate structures, with property tax, to make sure that we've planned 50 years out to pay for these things. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a little bit about how we approach it at Central.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I guess in the terms of our committee, we're really looking at issues that affect the nature of the partnership that we have, and you know, where we've got the state jurisdiction and what we
Right.
can and would do. I mean, I guess the question would be, if we had control of our water system completely, what would that look like?
Well, I think from my perspective at Central, we do have control over our water system. We're the ones that turn the valves, we're the ones that fix the pipes, we're the ones that make deliveries. We're wholesale, not retail, but we make deliveries to other entities that then in turn retail. But we are in control. Some of the projects that are older, that are in need of repair, and the local folks don't have sufficient funds, I can see that being something that this group would be concerned about. But from Central's perspective, we're in a pretty good position with the ability that we have to fund as we move into the future. And our contracts with the federal government are in perpetuity. The price is set, so we know how much water we have, and we know how much it costs.
Thank you, Representative Ivory. I don't see any other for discussion or question. I think we've covered what we needed to there. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to comment on this online? Let's see, who do we have there?
That's me.
Representative Romero?
Thank you,
Thank you.
Representative. I just wanted to thank you because the way you presented and the way you're giving information is very helpful for me, because water is not my expertise. And so I just want to say thank you for just putting it out there and giving the facts.
You're very kind, thank you. I've had water on the brain for many years.
Thank you, Representative. I don't see anyone from the... Okay, we'll close our public comment period then and bring it back to committee for further action discussion.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Department of Interior site on the Central Utah Water Project, and the last part of the overview says, over the decades since the CUP's authorization, the changing political climate, budget priorities, emerging environmental concerns have resulted in many changes to the project. And I guess that's, what does that mean? I mean, what could it be, what would it have been, but for the political climate, budget priorities, emerging environmental concerns?
When the Central Utah project was first passed, it was passed pre-ESA and pre-NEPA. Those two laws have dramatically changed how the project has been constructed. There were plans, they were never projects designed for construction, but at one point in time, the Central Utah project was planned to take water from Flaming Gorge, to bring it across to the east, across all of the canyons, and Senator Winterton and I were chatting about this before we started, to bring water to all those canyons, bring water into Strawberry Reservoir, There would have been another dam below Strawberry Reservoir in up Diamond Fork Canyon. That would have been a power plant. There would have been a tunnel. There was a tunnel projected at one time through Loafer Mountain that would have delivered water into Juab County for irrigation purposes. And all the way into, the reservoir south of Yuba, there you go. Water all the way to Yuba, and then water by exchange would have been transferred all the way up to Hatch. And so that was the original concept, okay? I have to emphasize the word concept. With the passage of ESA, with the passage of NEPA, with the growth in Salt Lake County and the growth along the Wasatch Front, it became obvious that we were going to not have enough water to do both. Utah Lake, at one point in time, the thought process was to dike the south portion of Utah Lake and Provo Bay, which would have reduced significantly the surface area, which would have reduced the evaporation, and that would have generated a water supply. It was actually the state of Utah that concluded the environment would be too impacted by those dikes, and that's why that plan never came to fruition. And as we went through the late 80s and tried to get more money to finish the Central Utah project through the Bureau of Reclamation, it became obvious that Congress didn't have the stomach to give Utah that much more money. And so President Carter's time frame, Utah, the Central Utah project, was on the hit list and was defunded, if you will. And so we had to resurrect the funding for that. As we went to Congress to get additional money, Congress said, you're not going to do things like you've always done them in the past. You're going to have environmental issues you're going to have to wrestle with. You're going to have construction issues. You're going to have costs. You're going to have to come up with 35% of the cost share rather than the feds coming up with 100. You're going to build the project. We are much, much more efficient working with contractors and consultants than Reclamation was with their large technical folks, because there were technical folks that got paid for 40 hours a week, and they may only work on a project 3 or 4 hours a week, and they were working on other projects. So the overhead was reduced significantly, and we received responsibility to complete the project construction-wise. We are even under CUPCA, a federal agency for the purposes of NEPA. So we fill out our own NEPA documents. Again, something that has never been done in the country. And so there were tremendous amounts of changes, and what's listed on the webpage there is just a tip of the iceberg of the changes that we've had to make over time to bring a drink of water into the populous Wasatch Front.
Is it fair to say that but for the things that they're talking here, the political climate and environmental things, we would have then built out more of that water system in Utah?
No, we would have just used the water in a different fashion.
Okay.
We would not have been able to bring more water. The system out in the Uinta Basin was already set in size, and so we would not have been able to bring more water. It would have been used for different purposes, most likely more ag, and in today's world we know that ag projects aren't necessarily economically feasible when you're bringing water that far. So my gut tells me it would have ended up pretty much the way it is, just because we're delivering M&I water to the places where M&I water is demanded at this point.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate the time and effort you put into being here and joining us. Thank you so much, and we'll excuse you and
Thank you.
wish you well.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Next, we'll welcome our representative from our Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, Mr. Hoyt. We have discussion our state resource management plan. Let me maybe segue into this. Statutorily, we if there's changes to our resource management plan, then they come to this commission. We will consider potentially an action to open a committee bill file to adopt recommendations that may be proposed here by PLIPCO, but that's the intent. Required to notify the commission before the end of August. That notification, or September, that notification was received, and now we have a chance to hear about that today, so welcome. At times, I've called you deputy director or what is currently your title currently?
Yeah, my title, which I gave myself, is Planning Program Manager.
Planning Program Manager, okay.
It looks better on paper.
Very good. Thank you for being here. Please proceed.
Thank you. This is my third time coming before this commission to make amendments to the State Resource Management Plan. Just a little background, it was originally adopted in 2018. Then we've made amendments in 2022, 2023, and hopefully in 2024. And we do this for kind of three reasons. The main one being that we want to improve our relationships and conversations with whoever we're working with, particularly the state's relationships with the federal government. And we do that through coordination, cooperation, consultation, and consistency. Some people in our office call those the 4 C's. And if we could do those 4 things consistently with whoever we're working with, we would have very little dispute or need for litigation. Unfortunately, that does not happen very often. It does happen on occasion. So we use the State Resource Management Plan at the Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office to inform the comment briefs that we submit on federal actions, as well as consistency reviews and for litigation purposes when that's necessary. And in the interest of time, I won't go into all of the changes, but you do have them. It's about 280 pages in a PDF, but I've taken the time to show what's been removed by striking that out in the text. Doesn't necessarily mean it was removed from the document. For example, the Clean Water Act was moved from the introduction to the water quality section. Anything new or proposed to be added is in red. And there are some big things that have happened over the last year. We've learned some valuable lessons. Good example would be there was a court case, the Supreme Court, which was Sackett versus the EPA, which is about waters of the United States. And that is going to have significant changes for the Army Corps of Engineers when it comes to wetlands. So there's some pretty substantial changes to the wetland section, as well as the riparian section. And a lot of the language that was added there came from the state's Coordinated Action Plan for Water that was published last year and I believe finished this year. We've also seen a lot of funding coming from the federal level in different bills. And we're seeing a lot of that funding go toward wildfire crisis areas or invasive species like Russian olive and tamarisk. And those are things that weren't necessarily addressed very well in the State Resource Management Plan, so we tried to clarify that. The Wildlife Code was updated from 23 to 23A, and I had to find all the cross-references and update those kind of things. But for the most part, I think that the important part of this is just showing that we're trying to learn lessons and be as proactive as we can to protect the state's interest and to protect our natural resources and our public lands the best we can.
Thank you. I'm going to open up. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to comment on this issue? I don't see any. I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and potential action. Representative Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Dylan, for mentioning those things you're going to want to change. My question, and I reserve the right to make a motion for committee.
Yes.
My question would be, given the fact that every county has a resource management plan, some counties, is the federal government listening?
Yes, they are. We're actually seeing that more and more often, that they're actually citing to the county resource management plans or the state plans when they put out their notice in the Federal Register. We're actually seeing where they've cited those plans in those announcements, so that it's not necessarily us coming back as a comment and saying, hey, just so you know, these exist in county resource management plans. They've actually been doing that in some occasions, not all occasions.
So did they listen to Grand County, or did they listen to everybody involved, off-road users and so forth?
Yeah, that's a very complicated question, isn't it? And I think that it really comes down to who the decision maker is at what field office. Generally speaking, we have really good relationships with most of the BLM and Forest Service employees in Utah, but they don't necessarily get their marching orders from Utah. And it makes a very big difference where things ultimately go, because you may have 5 or 6 alternatives for an action, and the one you think is going to get chosen somehow ends up at the bottom of the pile, and then you have to scramble, and sometimes you have to go for litigation.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where we're headed, so I think you answered it correctly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Make that motion if you want me to.
You reserve the right to make a motion. What would be the motion?
The motion would be to open up a bill file from this commission to address the changes that Dylan has referenced in our state resource management plan.
Thank you. That motion is in order. The motion is to open a committee bill file to adopt the recommended changes as presented by PLIPCO. I'll just explain procedure. We're opening up a bill file. We're not approving it yet. This begins that process also. Thank you. Would you like to, let's see, we'll open that up to discussion to the motion. Senator Hinkins.
Yeah, I would just like to elaborate a little bit back on to what he's mentioned about the county's resource plans. When you look at the BLM, they are under the Department of the Interior, and the Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture, and a lot of times their policies are different. And I've talked to both BLM people as well as the Forest Service people, and because the county's got it, it kind of brings it all together, and they're able to make a decision based on that, because sometimes they conflict each other, and they're different departments, and you understand it. It's not like they're trying to do anything one way or the other. It's like you got to do it the BLM's way, or you got to do it the Forest Service ways. But where we have, and it was intentional that we mirrored the Federal Register when we done our management plans with the counties, and so it kind of puts both of those departments on the same page. And so appreciate all you're doing, and to keep it up, because the biggest fear we had that this would be put on a shelf and never seen again. After we funded all this, correct me if I'm wrong, Chairman, and but you guys have flown with it, and we appreciate it, and it's really helping with our, because it was a misunderstanding more than it was anything else, policy or anything else. It was just that field directors were going by their policy book, and this way where the counties, because it's in, and most of them are residents of these counties, and they want to do what's best for us. I mean, they're federal, they work for the government, but they're still our neighbors, and they want the same thing for their children as we want for our children. So, I mean, we just got to get on the same page, and this has done it, and I appreciate all your efforts. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion to the motion? I don't see any. We'll bring it back to Representative Albrecht for summation.
I would
the
just
motion.
say that I think the state resource management plan and the county management plans, as Senator Hinkins has mentioned, have been really good. I appreciate what Reg and Dylan and that office has done. I know they've worked their tails off on a lot of these issues in the rural counties, and we appreciate that. I think he's right, you know, we're probably going to end up in litigation, but that's my summation.
Thank you. So before us, we have a motion to open up a bill file, and which will then authorize the staff to work with our planning program manager, Dylan Hoyt, on the language of that would be the language associated that we would be adopting. It's a fairly short bill language that just it's one page, but the key is what's in the reference to that one line that we're adopting this version, so. All in favor to the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, if any, nay. It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. Sure, would you mind, Representative Ivory?
Yeah, thank you. And maybe this might be something that needs to be added in. I don't know. I should have considered that sooner. But one of the first executive orders that President Biden signed, it was on January 27th. It's Executive Order 14008. And in Section 216 of that executive order, he makes the order to achieve the goal of conserving at least 30% of U.S. land and water by 2030. And I've seen and heard reports that in what's considered protected for purposes of 30 by 30, that Utah's considered only 12% protected. I don't know, do you know what percentage of Utah is considered protected for purposes of this 30 by 30 executive order?
That's a good question. I've never heard the 12%. I will tell you that there are a wide array of definitions for the words conserved, preserved, and protected. And I think this kind of takes us back to, especially under the Federal Land Policy Management Act, multiple use mandates, sustained yield mandates. The conservation and land health proposed rules that came out earlier this year are part of the language is to make conservation a use. It is not currently a use. So that's one thing we're monitoring. When it comes to these percentages, they are in a lot of ways arbitrary. You know, how do you conserve 30% of a state that's 99% private lands, right? And so there's a lot of unknowns there. I think the intention is good, you know, to put nature in a good place where it's there for future generations. I think the execution could use more coordination.
So this is being done by a presidential executive order to declare, to take 30% of land and water. I would propose perhaps to add to what we have in the resource management plans and what PLIPCO monitors is to understand what is considered protected and what actions are being taken. I don't know of anything in the Constitution that allows the president to make an executive order and declare taking 30% of land and water and doing something. I don't know. I mean, the Fifth Amendment would seem to argue very much against that. The Article 1, Section 817, and then also the property clause would seem. So I would like to make sure that we've got in our resource management plans that we're actively monitoring and reporting back and looking at what are the efforts to do this so that we can decide as a state the jurisdiction and what we do on a declaration by a president to conserve 30% of the land. I just don't know anything in the Constitution that allows a president to do that. So I know of other things like the conservation leasing where they're taking acts in furtherance. I'd like to see us make sure that we have active monitoring in what that is so that, especially the Federalism Committee, we can take actions that protect the jurisdiction of the state with respect to that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, real quick on that.
Yes.
It may be there to some extent, but maybe not spelled out the way you've said it. But it would make sense to do that in 63L 11-104, which is where it tells us to essentially report back to this body and submit amendments and reports. That's probably the better place for that to be. As this moves forward through the legislative process, if there are goals, objectives, or policies that need to be added or subtracted, that's at the prerogative of this body and of the other committees. So I would recommend that you do that.
That'd
if
be
it's
great. And
needed.
then if
Thank
you
you.
would, just see if we can't figure out, and I can get the article and statement declaration that Utah was supposedly only 12% protected. So if you could see what you could find out about what is the status of this declaration and what's considered protected or not in Utah.
Yeah, we can look into that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've opened up a committee bill file, so I'll invite any members of the committee that want to interact with our Mr. Hoyt to do so. Thank you. All right, we'll excuse you and we'll move on to our next. Our next item, item number 4, U.S. Forest Service ruling on e-bikes. The next several agenda items came as we counseled together as a commission on items that are of concern that we're seeing, and this one was brought by Representative Albrecht. So I'm going to invite Mr. Jason Curry, Director of the Division of Recreation Department of Natural Resources, to come to the microphone. And then Representative Albrecht, I would invite you, if you'd like, as a segue in to introduce this issue. I would just note for our minutes that we invited the National Forest Service to come and talk about this policy to the commission. They originally agreed to be here, then declined 24 hours later. Instead, they sent information about the policy, which has been emailed to the commission members, posted on our commission website. I would again publicly invite our U.S. Forest Service representatives to come to a future meeting to discuss this and any other federalism issues that we would like. So that's part of our statutory mandate, is to interact with our federal elected representatives and agencies as well. So it's disheartening that they chose not to come, but let's proceed. Representative Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've had several people in my district to ask about why the Forest Service come out and made this FSM 7700 travel management on e-bikes. In our area, we have a lot of, in my district, we have a lot of trails, both off-road vehicles and bike trails, and they're building more all the time. But we get people in there who are older, like myself, and have an e-bike, and then they find out that they're not allowed to ride on these trails. The previous administration allowed this, and then it was rescinded under the current administration. The other day I was texting Mr. Curry, our Director of Outdoor Rec, and asked him what the deal was in the state of Utah, and he volunteered to come and comment. You know, we've got this FSM 7700 they sent us on class 1, 2, and 3 e-bikes. To me, I mean, here we are converting our national fleet, supposedly. They want to go to electric vehicles, but then they won't even allow an e-bike with a self-contained electric motor on these trails. You know, there's more people than those just 50 and below that would like to see some of this country, and an e-bike certainly helps. So I would just, with that introduction, you know, ask Mr. Curry, what's Utah's policy? And then, like you, I would encourage the Forest Service. I know Nathan tried to get a hold of them, and they agreed, and then all of a sudden they said, no, we're not coming. I don't know what precipitated that. Probably because we would be a little bit adversarial, I'm assuming. But anyway, let's turn the time to Mr. Curry.
Thank you, Representative Albrecht. Director?
Well, yeah, thank you, Representative Albrecht and Mr. Chair. I hear these same concerns brought before me. I get calls about this from recreational users, trail managers, people that are advocates and foundations that build trails, the retailers that sell these products, people that rent them as part of their business, and even people at the ski resorts that operate their resorts on Forest Service property. So you can't, currently on Forest Service, they are considered a motorized vehicle, which is just, it's inconsistent with state law. And so state statute does include e-bikes under the definition of a bicycle. They're categorized the same as a bicycle. Anywhere a bicycle is allowed, an e-bike is also. And an e-bike too is very specific. They have pedals, the kind that you see, emerging more and more now that don't have pedals, that are closer to a motorcycle. That's not an e-bike, but the ones that have pedals, all this does is provide a little bit of assistance for the rider, and yeah, there's a lot to see. National parks right now allow e-bikes anywhere they allow regular pedal bikes, and so they've done similar to state parks. So both state and national parks, you can ride an e-bike. Anywhere you can ride a regular bike, you can also ride one of these pedal assist bikes. And the BLM has been a little more progressive with it. They've thought this is something that more and more people are using. This is something where people are able to experience BLM lands outside of just in a motorized vehicle. So they've opened, including in a lot of places in Trails Country, there in Richfield, those BLM routes have been opened to e-bike use. But the Forest Service currently considers them a motorized vehicle. And we've advocated for consistency from that federal USDA definition to match closer with what most of the states are doing, which matches with what one of the biggest cycling organizations in the country, People for Bikes, has also identified.
Thank you. So, feedback on what is said, a e-bike that we're talking about isn't one that you have to be pedaling to have the boost. That's the definition. You can't just sit and it'll go, correct?
Well, there are 3 classifications, Class 1, 2, and 3. Class 1 is pedal assist only, and the motor stops providing assistance at 20 miles an hour. Class 2 does have a throttle, so a Class 2 bike, you could use the throttle and not pedal, but again, it gives out at 20. And then a Class 3 is pedal assist only, no throttle, but can go up to 28 miles an hour. So those 3 classifications have been adopted by the Forest Service, by the BLM. They're recognized, they're consistent across all states, but for the most part, especially Class 1, it's just pedal assist only, and those are the ones that make the most sense for use on those multi-use trails.
In our national forests, or excuse me, our national parks, our state parks, the BLM allow electrical e-bike, but not national forest. Is that correct?
Yeah, so national parks, state parks, they do allow them anywhere a regular bike
They're
is
allowed.
BLM is a case by case, so depending on the district and their travel management decisions, they've opened certain trails to e-bikes, not the same way that national parks have done.
Well, dealing with conflicts between regulations and who has the authority to regulate is all of what this commission is all about, and so I'll open it up to discussion. Representative Romero?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question for you is, with I guess obviously different administrations viewed this differently, but what was the reason for them closing off these trails to e-bikes? Was there a particular reason that was given, or?
I don't think any particular reason was given other than more research, more analysis was needed.
So I guess my question for you would be then, maybe right now they're not going to allow e-bikes on, but in the future that could be a possibility because they're looking into it. Does it have to do with I don't know if anyone here bikes, but there's definitely a difference between when you're on your bike, your mountain bike, and when you're on an e-bike.
Yeah, and they do right now. Forest Service's direction is outlined in that 7700 document. Is basically going to require them to come up with another classification of motorized vehicle, and that's really where the problem lies. Is there's inconsistency with the fact that the state and many other states define an e-bike as a bicycle. Probably the most popular trail in South Davis County is the Mueller Park Trail. I ride it all the time. I've ridden it for years. Historically, it's always been open to motorized use, including dirt bikes. So you can ride a KTM 350 or Yamaha, whatever, and it's in great condition. It's not one that requires an inordinate amount of maintenance. Trail conflicts are there, but people are generally pretty polite, and I don't think e-bikes are going to cause more impacts than a motorcycle. So at this point, it probably, the problem lies in the definition of an e-bike as a motorized vehicle.
So I guess so you answered my question. So the reason for this, doing more research, is not necessarily we don't like e-bikes, but they're just looking at the classification, whether it's a motorized vehicle or if it's a bike.
Yeah, it would be great if the Forest Service was here to answer that.
Yeah, maybe we can hopefully get them here next session.
We've had really great cooperation from our local forests and the ranger districts who understand this conflict and understand the problem. They view the e-bike problem as the same, It's a lack of direction, a lack of definition, and depending on which forest you are on, again, this is a lack of consistency, depending on which forest you are on, the enforcement level is going to be different, and what the instruction they've given to their folks is going to be different because of the, again, lack of consistency.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just trying to understand the reasoning behind it, because I think it's easy just to point fingers at the federal government or state government or county government. So I'm trying to understand the ideology behind that, because I know I'm an avid hiker, and I used to be an avid biker, not as much anymore. But I know there's a difference when I'm hiking and when I'm biking, and the different kind of people operating within those trails that I'm at. It can be dangerous at times. So that's what I was wondering. Is it because of that, or is it because of a definition?
Thank you. Representative, anything that concludes your discussion? Representative Ivory.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it would be nice if we could have our federal partner come and explain what is going on with this. I'd be interested to know from staff what they were invited. Why did they not come to explain this to us and help us work through this situation together as partners in this federal system?
Invite policy analyst Brady to offer response.
Nathan Brady with the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. I had phone conversations with some of their staff, and less than 24 hours later received an email response from another different person who I had not had conversations with, saying they would not be able to attend. I confirmed with the original person who I'd been working with, who said they would be able to come and talk to this and answer questions, and he confirmed with me that that meant he would not be able to come. I didn't receive any response or any explanation as to why. We did receive 2 documents that we've posted to our committee meeting materials, and Shay emailed out to the commission members. One is a document that just defines the definition of what an e-bike is for their purposes. The other one is a frequently asked questions document about their e-bikes policy. But yeah, we received no explanation as to why they decided not to be here in person.
One option would be is we could issue a subpoena to have them come, if you'd like. I don't know how they'll respond, but that is the right of each of our committees to subpoena people to come.
Well, I would just say, Mr. Chairman, I think it displays a lack of good faith in trying to get information over basic matters that affect the nature of this state-federal relationship, and very basic questions. We had requests from the minority members of legislature on the commission to have federal agencies come, and we've made that request, and I think we all would have been very interested to hear. I think it shows an unfortunate lack of good faith to address those things in a workable manner.
Further discussion, Representative Romero?
Mr. Chair, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, because I get frustrated with this committee. I'm just going to be honest with you, with just the conversations. I told our staff that I would assist them. I got busy at work. So before we subpoena anyone, give me the opportunity for our next meeting to reach out to my contacts as well to see if we can get people here. Things happen. They sent information, and so we can give people the benefit of the doubt. But I mean, we all are part of the United States of America. We're a state within the United States of America. And at times, it's hard for me to sit through this committee because of the tone.
Mr. Chair,
Further discussion. Thank you, Representative Romero. Representative Albrecht.
I think the least we should do is write a letter to Mary, whatever her name is, in Ogden.
Farnsworth?
What is it?
Farnsworth?
Yeah, Farnsworth. And ask her why they didn't come to present and see if they would in a future meeting. And then if they don't, then you can pursue other avenues. I've found her to be pretty cooperative on timber sales and forest rejuvenation and different items.
It could be anything from we have a conference and a conflict, anything, and it's, you know, it's wise not to make any assumptions. My point in offering a subpoena option was just to help. Most legislators don't realize on any issue that they can, as a committee can do that. So I'm just trying to educate, not go down a rabbit hole. So that's the point there, and I think it'd be appropriate. I think we understand. We posted the rules for and the response, and we can again invite and say we'd like to discuss this. I think there's validity in having consistency across the state.
In the
on
past,
this issue,
Mr.
so.
Chair, we've written letters, and I would suggest we have a letter from this commission asking Mary Farnsworth to have someone here at our next meeting.
Very good. Further discussion, Senator Hinkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that we put it in our management resource plan for the state, and then if they have a rebuttal to it, they'll come and let us know. And it's up to our state parks, aren't they? Aren't they the ones that usually write tickets and stuff? But like if you're on the snowmobile, I didn't know that, because we darn sure don't want the Forest Service starting to write them, because if you protest it, you've got to go to Denver to protest it. So I thought our state parks are the ones that regulate a lot of those for boats and for snowmobiles, and I assume ATVs are the one that checks to make sure they have stickers up to date and all that sort of stuff. So who enforces this? Is it the Forest Service? I've never heard of it.
It may be, Senator, do you have a comment?
Well, yeah, we do, yeah. So rangers with the State Parks Division, they're out patrolling, but yeah, our rangers with the Division of Outdoor Recreation patrol trails quite a bit within the National Forest System and on BLM lands. The problem lies where it can be very easy for a user to start out in a state park riding their e-bike where it's completely allowed, and then ride a mile or two and then end up on National Forest System and there's no sign, and now all of a sudden they're in violation. I think, well, what I've been told by some of the folks at various national forests is right now, if it sounds like a bike and it looks like a bicycle that is, then there's no enforcement action because of this confusion and lack of clarity.
And the other question is that I had was, can they just buy an ATV sticker and stick on their bike and be legal?
Well, currently they can ride on motorized routes. An e-bike is allowed.
Okay.
And that's one of the other issues.
Without a sticker?
Right, without a
Okay.
sticker. But then there'd be, again, the conflict between state law and federal law. That's one of the issues that's been brought up by IMBA, the International Mountain Biking Association, is if these vehicles are considered motorized, that brings up some real issues as far as the routes they're allowed to be on. If they're only allowed to be on where motorized routes are, well then they're now taking advantage of a system where the individuals that register an ATV and an off-highway motorcycle and so forth, they're paying the burden, and then the e-bikes are enjoying the benefits, inordinately.
Yeah, the ATVs are paying for the maintenance of the trails and putting in the bridges and the cattle guards and everything else, and everybody else is on a free ride.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, but for their
Thanks, Mr.
registration fees, it wouldn't even be possible.
Thank you. Well, I think we've had a good discussion at this point. Let's open up to the public. Anybody here from the public to comment on this agenda item? Very good. We'll close public comment and move it back to commission discussion action. Representative Albrecht, do you have how you'd like to proceed at this point?
Yeah, I would make a motion that we write a letter from the commission to Mary Farnsworth and ask her why they didn't send a representative, or if they would at our next meeting.
Would you like to invite him again as well? So you'd ask,
Well,
the
yeah.
reasons and
I would, and-
another invitation?
But address the letter to her. She's the regional forester.
Okay. Motion's in order. Discussion of the motion. Come back, Representative Albrecht for summation.
Oh, wait.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion to state that we write a letter to the Director of the Forest Service requesting an explanation of the reason not able to come and inviting again to come and engage in conversation and dialogue. Is that correct, Representative Albrecht?
That's correct.
Okay. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any, say nay. We're unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for all you're doing, Director Curry, for our recreation and our natural resources. Pass along our appreciation to your division. All right, next we're on item number 5, impact of the new national monument along the Utah-Arizona border. We've invited Mr. Hayden Ballard. He's Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office attorney. We've invited him to join remotely. He's actually from Cedar City and actually has a firsthand knowledge growing up in Fredonia. If you know, Fredonia is just on the other side of the border from Kanab and in this beautiful area of our state. So, Mr. Ballard, you look
Yes, sir.
good.
First of all, can you hear me, committee members?
We can hear you. Very good. We can see you both. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. First of all, I appreciate this opportunity to come and visit with you. I apologize for my venue. I'm here in my work vehicle. I'm on my way to Tropic, Utah for a meeting with our grazers over there to discuss some issues on the Grand Staircase National Monument. So down here in southern Utah, national monuments have sadly just become a fact of life. And Flipco, we are doing our best to help our producers and our other natural resource users navigate this new legal framework. So again, apologize for the vehicle, but bounce between meetings here. So so I only caught part of the introduction there, but yes, I'm an attorney with Flipco. And I grew up in Fredonia, Arizona. It's right there by Kanab on the other side of the border on what's called the Arizona Strip. And the Arizona Strip is essentially all of the land in Arizona north of the Colorado River, north of the Grand Canyon. And so all those communities on the Arizona Strip are both geographically and culturally tied more to Utah than they are to the rest of the state. For example, Fredonia, where I grew up, our county seat was in Coconino County, which was Flagstaff. It was about a 4-hour drive to get there, whereas the Kane County seat in Kanab was about 7 miles. For a lot of our folks in Beaver Dam and Littlefield, similar situation. So this monument, even though it's in Arizona, it has some very strong impacts on southern Utah. And I have a few of those I'd like to go through. So this monument, the official title is called the Ancestral Footprints on the Grand Canyon National Monument. And if you were to draw a line south out of Hilldale, Utah, all the way to the Colorado River, and then east to Page, Arizona, I'm painting with broad strokes here, but pretty much everything in that area between the Colorado River and the Utah border would be part of this new national monument. It's a little over 900,000 acres, and I wish I could show you a map, but that huge swath of land was designated here just over a month and a half ago by President Biden, arguably, I would say, as part of his 30 by 30 agenda to quote unquote conserve 30% of our land mass, going back to Representative Ivory's discussion a moment ago. And so how this impacts Utah, the first thing this does is in 2012, let me give you a little history. In 2012, the BLM under President Obama issued a uranium exploration moratorium on the Arizona Strip. The Arizona Strip historically has been one of the largest producers of uranium in the country, with most of the uranium being shipped to Blanding, Utah to be processed there. So in 2012, they issued an exploration moratorium that was set to last 20 years. It was set to expire in 2032. In 2020, President Trump made some attempts to revoke that moratorium to allow for uranium exploration. The election happened, and under our new administration, that was set aside. And in the meantime, in between 2021 and 2023, Arizona Representative Raul Grijalva ran what was called the Grand Canyon Protection Act, which was essentially it was a uranium mineral withdrawal bill that would extend that moratorium indefinitely. It would take that 20-year moratorium and extend it indefinitely. His bill failed to pass Congress twice, and so he couldn't get the support in Congress to get that bill passed. So he teamed up with Arizona Senator Sinema, and together they petitioned to the president to include this as one of his new national monuments. And interestingly enough, the boundaries of this new national monument are identical to the mineral withdrawal bill proposed in 21 and 22. So they couldn't get it through Congress, so they bypassed Congress and went to the president and used an executive order to do it instead. And so what that has done, it has now extended that uranium withdrawal moratorium indefinitely. There will be no more uranium exploration or mining in that area. And like I said, the plant in Blanding, that was a huge source of their uranium prior to 2012. So that shuts that off indefinitely. The second thing it does is grazing on the Arizona Strip has historically benefited Utah more than it has Arizona. The reason being the grazing allotments in that monument arguably are about 70 to 80% of those are actually owned by residents of Kane and Washington counties. And so what producers in Utah will do a lot of times is you will graze your cattle in the higher elevations in Utah, and in the winter they'll graze in the lower elevations on the Arizona Strip. And so given the patterns we're seeing on the Grand Staircase and the Bears Ears National Monuments, where there are huge pushes to decrease available AUMs, decrease available allotments, we are predicting to see the same approach when they roll out the RMP on this monument as well. So if our producers in Utah lose their winter grazing on the Arizona Strip, it effectively puts those producers out of business. And so that is proportionally going to affect our Utah producers more than Arizona. And we can get into more details on that, but the third thing I wanted to raise is utility corridors. Everyone knows about the Lake Powell pipeline. The original route of the Lake Powell pipeline crossed what is now part of this national monument. And if you read, let me read you some of the language in there. It talks about how only projects that were existing or previously approved, such as utilities and pipelines, only if they were existing or previously approved could they then be constructed. And so where the Lake Powell pipeline, it's in that gray area. Well, was it existing or previously approved, where we'd started the NEPA, where we'd started that process or not? And two, you can only put in pipelines if they are consistent with the proper care management of the objects. That's important because a national monument has to meet two parameters, right? You have to be able to identify an object to protect, and you have to identify why the acreage is the minimum amount necessary to protect that object. In this proclamation, they've been very, very loose with what are qualified as objects. They've classified the entire landscape as an object, and they've also said, quote, some of the objects in these areas are so sensitive, rare, or vulnerable, or are unsafe to visit. Therefore, revealing their specific names or locations could pose a danger to the objects or to the public. So they've said there's objects we have to protect in this 1 million acres, but we can't tell you what they are because they're either too sacred or would pose a danger to the public who is supposed to be coming in and enjoying them. So if we are to construct the Lake Powell pipeline in accordance with the protection of the objects, we can't do that because the president has refused to even identify an object, which is blatantly against the Antiquities Act. The fourth thing, and then I'll be open to questions. The fourth thing this does is this increases a burden on our southern Utah communities in terms of infrastructure, recreation, housing, all those things, because of its proximity to the Utah border. The only towns actually in Arizona don't have the hotels. They don't have the restaurants. Those are located in Kanab. Those are located in St. George, Hurricane. And so the towns in Utah are going to get overwhelmed by this increase in visitation, and not inarguably aren't equipped for it. So those are the four things I wanted to raise. Back to Representative Ivory's point about the 30 by 30. You said that 12% of Utah is considered protected as part of the 30 by 30 plan. And I'm not a betting man, but if I was a betting man, if I was going to Vegas, I would say that if you took all the land in Utah that was either in a national park, a national monument, or a wilderness area, and you were to combine that acreage and figure out what that was as a percentage of the state of Utah, if I was a betting man, I'd say that's about 12%. Because what we've seen is the president is using these national monuments to fulfill that 30 by 30 agenda. And this is just one more example of it. So with that, I'm open to questions.
The 4 points that you mentioned, the last one was the challenge on the Utah communities. The third one was utility corridors. The second one was grazing. What was the first one?
The first one is the uranium withdrawal.
Uranium withdrawal. Okay, Representative Albrecht, do you have, I want to give you some time as part of the presentation as well, because this is your item, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Hayden, for your presentation. I know you're over there working on the grazing on the grand staircase tonight. As he mentioned, it's mostly Garfield, Kane, Washington, and probably a little bit of San Juan that these producers graze on in the wintertime. And with this being declared a monument, and then the existing fight on the Grand Staircase Escalante monument, there are going to be some folks, some families that'll go out of business because there's nowhere else to graze their cattle in the wintertime. The other thing that really concerns me is we have an administration that wants us to go clean energy, wind, solar, nuclear, anything that does not produce carbon, and yet we've locked up some of the best uranium resources in the whole country, the whole world, really. Some of that uranium ore is 2% grade, which is very high. And that concerns me if we're going to try to convert to nuclear and do away with our coal plants. The other thing that really concerns me too is he mentioned electric utility lines or just any kind of corridor for the pipeline or the electric lines to serve the pumping stations. I used to manage Garcane Power, and that was our service territory in Arizona, and we filed on rights of ways to serve the Lake Powell pipeline a long time ago, and that's going to affect that a great deal too. So the bottom line is we're talking about affecting families, you know. People are going to go out of business. Kids are going to not be able to attend school. They're going to move with their parents where they can find employment. And it's very concerning. And I know the only way we can probably fight this is more litigation, and that'll probably happen. But it's sad for those folks that live in those rural Utah counties, because as he said, it's really more part of Utah than it is Arizona for a lot of reasons.
Thank you, Representative. By way of clarification, and either Representative Albrecht or Council Ballard, the west border of the monument is the Colorado River, or is it the that's the south border? What, does it go into the Arizona Strip out of St. George down to Beaver? No, it's not. What's the city?
Beaver Dam?
Yes,
Beaver Dam.
Yes, you're thinking Beaver Dam.
It ends at Beaver Dam. So the west.
It does not. It doesn't go that far west. So the west border is about directly south of Hilldale in Colorado City. So maybe 30, 40 miles east of Hurricane. And yeah, then the south and east borders are essentially, for all intents and purposes, the Grand Canyon National Park.
Thank you. All right, we're going to open it up for public comment. Is anybody here from the public like to address this? Welcome, Representative Lyman. State your name and for the record. And
Thank you. Phil Lyman. Appreciated Hayden's report on that. And I have quite a bit of history with this, so I'll just give a little bit of it. I was elected to the county commission in 2010. There was nobody running against me, so as of March of 2010, I basically started attending the meetings, and one of those was the Arizona Strip meetings about the moratorium that was being proposed. We went through those meetings for about a year and a half, and towards the end of it, one of the largest funders of the program, a company by the name of Uranium One, who had been very involved, showed up and said, "We're not going to be involved in this discussion any longer because we got bought out by Russia." And this was at the end of 2011. Bought out by Russia. It's like, well, how did that happen? They said, well, the deal was brokered by Hillary Clinton, and we got bought out. Come to find out that Frank Giestra, who was the financier for Uranium One, also about that time did a $131 million donation to the Clinton Foundation. On that sale, he made roughly $1 billion, so I guess it was money well spent. The other place where the Uranium One had claims was in San Juan County, in a place now that is underneath the Bears Ears National Monument. So if we want to unpack this, if we find this is not about protecting anything, this is about locking up the United States strategic uranium reserves to the detriment of our national security by people who don't like us, who don't want us to succeed. And I will say on the Uranium One deals, as I started looking back into it, they actually began in 2009, which is the same year that President Obama took office, and Secretary Clinton was the Secretary of State. And as those things moved forward, they came into my community in 2009 to set the narrative of a community that needed to be punished and reprimanded and deserved a national monument. Again, had nothing to do with artifacts, had nothing to do with anything other than this weird agenda. And if we could see what's really going on with that agenda, I think we might, we might treat it a little bit differently. I guess, fast forward up to a month and a half ago when President Biden designated that national monument in Arizona. It does lock up the uranium that feeds the mill in Blanding. It's going to affect that mill dramatically, but more than that, it affects the national security of the United States. Now, in 2021, Senator Hinkins and I passed a bill, HB 451 or 415, 451, I believe it was, that said unconstitutional executive orders were prohibited from acting upon those. State agencies are prohibited from acting upon that. Now, I don't know what it means like with the Bears Ears national monument designation that the state is suing on that, but this all kind of comes together on my soapbox. But the Attorney General's office has a lawsuit out on that national monument, yet it didn't prevent. So I would say that's probably an unconstitutional, or at least we believe that it should be proved that it's constitutional. In the meantime, we're swapping out all of the sitla sections out of the Bears Ears National Monument in conformity with that executive order and in conformity with the Red Rock Wilderness Bill. So, and the Red Rock Wilderness Bill is run by, was proposed by SUA. It never was passed, but it was proposed by SUA, and now you've got the director of the BLM, Tracy Stone Manning, who's a former activist, tree spiker, and her deputy director, Nada Culver, who is the former director of the Wilderness Society, who are making these decisions. So all of this stuff, when you put it in its proper light, is nothing but a hostile takeover. And we can talk about all of the things that happen, and it wouldn't be as difficult to handle, except that real people are dramatically affected. They are losing their ranches, they're losing their livelihoods, they're losing their lives in certain circumstances. I don't know if the Federalism Commission is big enough to fix this, but but I do appreciate the efforts, and I just wanted to add that little bit of context.
Thank you. You're testifying as a citizen today, is that correct? Thank you.
Yes, yes, I am.
we'll
I will
note
say, when you see these things happening in the communities, and the people there feel they're looking for someone to come and correct those things that are going wrong, and when it doesn't happen, they tend to get a little bit desperate and sometimes do, try to make a point on their own, do a protest or something else, at which they get slapped down for. So really, this is a problem that should be dealt with by the state legislature. That's our job, is to protect people from federal overreach, and when it doesn't happen, it leaves a lot of people really frustrated, as you know.
So it sounds like maybe, Representative Albrecht, this might be like the, what is it, the OTC rule, or the transfer rule for what happens in one
ozone
state?
transfer rule.
Ozone
Transfer rule.
transfer rule, OTR, right? The impact on from one state to the next, and I suspect that the administration would be friendly to that type of an argument, apparently. So maybe we can. Part of the challenge is the fact that it isn't in the state of Utah, but there's this impact, and so that becomes the notion that we are states that need to work together. So, thank you. Let's see. There might be a couple of questions for. Well, let's see. Is there anyone else here that wants to on our public? Do we have any staff? Do we have anyone else wanting online that wants to comment on this? Okay. We'll go ahead and close public comment then, if that's okay. And
Representative, may I?
yes.
May I? If I'm speaking out of turn, you can tell me to shut up.
Let me just hold on just 1 minute, and I'm going to bring it back to our Senator Hinkins. Do you have? Okay, Representative Ivory. And then, let's see. Would you like to allow the witness to share before you?
Yeah,
or
some questions for him that I think are probably.
maybe you could make your comment and answer the questions.
Probably get right in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hayden, thank you very much. Was there any meaningful discussion with Utah and Utah officials before this designation was made by the administration?
Very little. I was in some meetings with, there were several municipalities as well as several of the counties in southern Utah that all passed resolutions opposing this monument. And I was in close contact with them and their attorneys, helping them put together those resolutions in opposition. Kane County passed one, Iron, Washington.
And I guess
the
Hayden,
town
what I'm getting at is, did the president and the administration interface with the governor and state officials on whether this was a good idea for the state of Utah?
No, sir.
Do you know?
They did not.
Do you know of any constitutional authority for a president to lock up land like this with the stroke of a pen?
The Antiquities Act allows them to create a monument, but as I said before, the two parameters are you must identify an object to protect, and you must identify why the acreage is the minimum necessary amount. And in this instance, they've painted broad strokes, calling the landscape an object, or refusing to identify an object, saying it's in public interest and public health and safety, that we don't tell you what they are. So I would argue it's an overreach.
Under this interpretation of Constitution, the Antiquity Act, is there any limit to what a president could lock up with the stroke of a pen?
It appears not. And until the Supreme Court finally weighs in on the lawsuits pending on the ground staircase in Bears Ears, I'm afraid the president will simply continue doing what he's doing.
So I'll share this with you, Hayden. It was January 4th of 2020. It's in the St. George News. where they describe that wilderness areas are the gold standard for protection and that only 12 to 13% of Utah falls within those, and that we're working to get that other 17% protected by 2030. And then, as you described, the legislation from 2012 was basically, that wasn't passed as legislation, was enacted as a monument here. The Red Rock Wilderness Act, there is in Natural Resources Defense Council and others where they lay out the Red Rock Wilderness Act, 9 million acres as needing to be designated as part of the 30 by 30, which is also the same people say that 30 by 30 is really 50 by 50. Their first step is 30 by 30. So we're looking at, you know, they're telling us that Red Rock Wilderness, 9 million acres, is the step they want to take to get to the 30 by 30. What does this do to the state-fed balance? This idea of federalism and having this partnership where the power and authority, the jurisdiction delegated to the federal government is few and defined, that reserved to the states numerous and indefinite. The original documents say, what does this kind of thing do to that balance, in your opinion?
Absolutely. In my humble opinion, it throws that balance out of balance, and they're simply circumventing the powers that we've given to Congress to manage these lands. We're circumventing them through these presidential executive orders and going around our elected officials. We've seen that on the staircase as well. They're essentially creating de facto wilderness areas in the Grand Staircase Monument by creating primitive zones and managing them to the same standards as a wilderness area without ever calling it a wilderness area or a wilderness study area. So they're meeting their same goals, and they're circumventing the proper channels. They're circumventing Congress to do it. So it's completely throwing that balance out of proportion.
Representative Ivory, does that conclude your questions?
I would simply propose that we do a letter similar to the letters that we did before, rejecting the authority of the federal government to make such designation and outlining the harm that it does to the state of Utah.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to take one more comment, and then we'll bring it back to Representative Albrecht. Senator Kwan.
Very much, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of questions, and I hope I can get this in before 4 minutes. The question is the monument wholly within Arizona?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And was this a monument that is proposed first by its own senator to go through the legislative process?
So it was actually originally proposed by Representative Raul Grijalva. He had proposed 2 different acts to create a mineral withdrawal, and they both failed Congress. And after they failed Congress twice, he then proposed it as a national monument.
And then more recently, then a bill was introduced by both Arizona senators, is that correct?
Yep, after the 2 failed bills.
So Senators Kelly and Sinema both introduced that, and my guess is they introduced that is because there's overwhelming support in their state for this monument. Is that true?
I can't speak to the entire state. There was a petition circulating prior to the designation that in about 2 weeks received close to 15,000 signatures in opposition to the monument, and the majority of them were from the Arizona Strip. So I can't speak to the rest of Arizona, but I could say northern Arizona was opposed to it overwhelmingly.
Thank you. I believe that there was a recent poll conducted this year in August that showed that about 75% of those polled were in support of this monument, and that was a bipartisan poll and bipartisan support for that. I believe that this was consistent with a poll that came out in 2022, so it shows the consistency of support for this within Arizona. I believe that it also showed that the number one reason that Arizonians feel this is important at 97% was that it does protect water. And I believe that it showed that only 12% said they opposed this national monument. I think that because it's wholly within Arizona, and I do think that there may be impacts here in Utah, and perhaps it was not being a good neighbor that Arizonians did not reach out to Utah to find out what the impacts might be. But I wonder if there was a decision that we made wholly within Utah, if we would be so as concerned to make sure that our Arizona neighbors, a minority of Arizona neighbors, would agree with the majority, a high majority of Utahns. So when we talk about states' rights and the impact of the state decisions to ask for a federal designation, which they did, I think that I would be more interested in what that actual state decisions were rather than the minority voice coming from, I should say that again, a minority of voices coming from a neighboring state. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
May I respond to the poll aspect of that?
We're going to move so we're going to go ahead and come back to Representative Albrecht. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the comments Senator Kwan made. However, we're talking about people's livelihoods in southern Utah, and that's number one important to me. Number two, we're talking about some of the world's highest grade uranium ore, and your administration, our administration, are the ones that's pushing clean energy. So in light of those things, and I don't think it would do any good to write our state director a letter. He's receiving his instructions from DC. All of these counties passed resolutions or wrote letters before the monument was designated. I think our governor and even our leadership did the same. But I think it's important for us to get on the record as a Federalism Commission and write a letter to Secretary Haaland, Department of Interior, and tell her for the reasons that we've discussed here, why we oppose this monument. And the two big items to me are livelihoods and energy. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So the motion is to write a letter to the Secretary of the Interior talking about the challenges to Utahns with this designation. Is that correct, Representative Albrecht?
That's correct.
Okay, the motion is in order. Discussion of the motion. Representative Kwan, or Senator Kwan, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I personally, and perhaps the minority party, would like to have a dissenting view should this pass, and I'm not sure if that is something that would go along with the letter, if we would do it separately, but I oppose the motion and wanted to be transparent about that.
Thank you. Further discussion of the motion? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to Representative Albrecht for summation.
I'll waive. We're short of time.
We'll do a roll call vote, turn it to our administrative assistant, excuse me. There you go, thank you.
Senators Kwan?
No.
Representative Albrecht?
Yes.
Ivory? Yes. Chair Stratton?
Yes.
Chair Winterton?
Yes.
passes with a vote of 4 in favor and Senator Kwan in opposition. Senator, I'm sorry. I do that to my children, and it means I love you. So I just and appreciate your voice always. Thank you. All right, we have to do a little housekeeping. At 6:05, we are 5 minutes past, but I want to try and keep a quorum if either on item 6 or item 7, there's a motion that is desired to be made. Representative Albrecht, do you desire to make a motion on agenda item 6?
I do, and for the same reasons that we've been discussing here. It's our duty as a Federalism Commission to check on our federal partners, and I think this decision by the BLM for off-road trail miles reduction by 1/3 is not right for the citizens of the state of Utah and the citizens of all the states surrounding us. We
Okay,
have a lot
let me just Senator Kwan, do you need to leave? Could you give 2 minutes for 2 motions? Okay.
and so I would make the motion.
Let me just segue in. These 2 items were meant to be introductory for future meetings, but there's potentially some motions to make. So Representative Albrecht, please.
Yeah,
to
I
the
think
motion.
I would make a motion that we write a letter from the Federalism Commission to the CANAB, or the Moab BLM office, and also to Secretary Halen, Interior Secretary, opposing what they did with off-road trails.
Okay, the motion is that we write a letter to the Secretary of Interior and
The Moab BLM office.
Moab BLM office in opposition to the road closures in and around Moab.
And I might just add, Mr. Chair, there'll be a lawsuit on this. Blue Ribbon Coalition has already indicated that.
Thank you. Discussion to the motion. Senator Kwan.
Thank you, and I will say, I will probably, once I learn a little bit more about this, I will oppose this, but I will probably want to write a letter opposing the letter. I don't know what to say in that way.
Well,
A dissenting voice.
what I
yes,
would
or
say-
something.
what I would say is we'll keep you informed of the
Thank you.
letter and then allow, not as part of the commission, but as
As a
a
dissenting.
senator and a member, you're free to, we're all free to do that either
Thank
way.
you.
So, thank you. See no further discussion. Summation, Representative Albrecht.
Oh, wait.
All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Well, hold on. Roll call vote here on this, and turn it. Thank you. Sorry.
Senator Kwan? Representative Albrecht?
Yes.
Ivory? Yes. Stratton, or Chair Stratton, excuse me.
Yes.
Chair Winterton?
Okay, passes 4 in favor and 1 opposed. Senator Kwan. Thank you. And Senator, you can give us another 60 seconds. Representative Ivory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, these are quite the quandaries that we have, and it's nothing compared to what happened in 1955. There was a VA complex in a town in Ohio, and because they didn't pay tax, the city wouldn't let their children even go to school. And it got to the president, and they looked at this, and they did a study of jurisdiction over federal areas within the states, and we've discovered that there's a 2-volume jurisdiction study on these very kinds of issues where they look at the jurisdiction over federal areas within the states. That was done in the late 1950s. Mr. Chairman, it speaks to the very questions and issues we have of jurisdiction now. I would propose that we submit to the attorneys that have been working for the commission to take this study. It's the federal study done by all the federal agencies, all the states' attorneys general, the U.S. Attorney General, and all the cases ever done on federal jurisdiction in the state, and ask that they bring that current and see if there's any changes in the law, any differences there may be in the law in bringing this very comprehensive study on federal jurisdiction that deals with the very kinds of issues we've done today. So the motion would be to submit to the attorneys that we have working with the commission to what it would take, a bid to bring current this study of jurisdiction over federal areas within the states.
Thank you. The motion is in order. Discussion to the motion. Seeing no request, bring it back. Representative Ivy for summation.
I'll waive.
All in favor of submitting to the attorneys that we have under contract as Federalism Commission attorneys to update the legislative jurisdiction under the Eisenhower presidency of the 1950s, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Thank you.
Senator Kwan? No. Representative Albrecht?
Yes.
Ivory?
Yes.
Chair Stratton?
Yes.
Chair Winterton?
Yes.
Passes with a 4-1 vote with Senator Kwan in opposition. Thank you. Senator Kwan, thank you so much for accommodating that and keeping us our quorum. And I'll take one more motion. Motion adjourned by Representative Albrecht. All in favor say aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.